APIs than most other countries. A lot of challenges do still remain, especially in terms of what are public infrastructures. We know that, for instance, a road is a public infrastructure. We know for sure a canal or a waterway is a public infrastructure. We do not know exactly what is a digital public infrastructure. There are a lot of terminologies going around. A lot of confusion around digital public goods and digital public infrastructure. And a lot of times when we say digital, there's always this idea of who owns the digital. So we have a lot of questions around that. Then there are industry words, terminologies like platforms, protocols, standards, which are thrown around. So I'll spend a couple of minutes about getting these clarity out, and then we will go into the panel. We have a technologist and a lawyer in the panel and a management professor, so you can't get more diverse than this. So the idea of a public infrastructure is it is common, it is open for use, people can use it, it will not be excluding anybody. There are no conditions for use of infrastructure. Nobody will stop you from entering a road. Nobody will stop you from drawing water from the ground or breathing good air. Right? So that's the non-exclusion. And the second part of the infrastructure, which is very important, is non-subtractable. The more I use, it is not going to reduce the utility for others. So if I am breathing good air, I am not significantly consuming more air than my neighbors don't get air. It's not subtractable. So with this non-subtractable and non-exclusion principles, we go to a digital. Digital also means that if I have to do non-exclusion, if I have to do non-subtractable, it has to be built on open standards. The standards need to be open so that anybody can join in, anybody can exploit, anybody can benefit out of this. Quite a lot of people confuse this with open source software. Software products which are open to use. So people say, oh, Google is public good. Right? In a technical sense, Google is non-exclusion. Anybody can go into a website and Google. Anybody can actually use Google without causing reduction of utility to others. In that sense, yes. But is it open source? Can I actually get the algorithm right? No, algorithms owned by Google. And it is not exactly built on open standards. Google's built its own standards. A typical infrastructure is our Indian idea of identities. The foundational identity that India has is an infrastructure which anybody can use, is built on open standards, and is non-exclusionary. People want to build genuine applications on top of identity. You can build an application on top of that. And it has solved a lot of problems. People, startups which are building products or services, had to validate who you are and spend time, effort building a module and on validation of who you are, credentialing who you are you sure you are yourself? Each department had its own account number. You had a income tax department had a permanent account number, and everything had a different account number. And each person was indexed in multiple ways. You had one common guardrail, you had one common railroad on which you can run a variety of trains. You can run the express train and this one. So therefore, a lot of things have gone from building platforms to being able to build what are called as protocols. Protocols are the way the internet was initially built. The internet is still sitting on what is called as a HTTP. It's a protocol. It's a language by which your browser speaks to the server of the company that you're searching for. The way the language that you speak, the grammar that you speak is a protocol. So if you're building good API, you should be able to build open protocols where anybody can speak with anybody. And the common language is open, anybody can learn that language and be able to speak that language. We have done a lot of, India has done a lot of progress on building protocols, on identity, on storage, on cloud storage, on variety of things. So given that we have done a lot of these and it has helped a lot of financial transactions. Like for instance, the payments ecosystem has been built around being able to identify who you are and real-time validate who you are, real-time connect with anonymity your bank. So my payments app will talk to your payments app without me knowing what your payment app is, what your bank account is, who your banker is. I just need your identity. We've been able to build that kind of a protocol in the financial services in payment space. We are doing that for a variety of other financial services, like in credit. We are doing that for accounting. We are doing that for a variety of other things. In building a lot of these things, we have a lot of challenges. We have challenges around, if I'm pulling out your credit history based on data that's available, not necessarily in public domain, right? We need consent. Have you given me consent? And this consent can take a variety of forms. And this consent can happen by a variety of standards. Consents can also be lifetime, consent can also be specific, consent can also be particular purpose for a particular entity. So there are a variety of challenges in providing consent. And we have been trying to regulate how we have been able to build this consent and the roles of consent managers and aggregators, account aggregators, and all of these have been trying to come about. And at this point in time, we do not know whether all of this will seamlessly work the way payments work. Payments does not require much of all of these consent, because a lot of anonymity, a lot of protocol which is open, whereas here there are too many entities when we are looking at credit. And therefore, what are the challenges? And I now introduce Mathew here. What are the challenges in managing consent?
Right. Some of it is, and I'll go, this is unstructured thought, obviously. Much like unstructured data, not as useful if I thought about it. But when we think of consent, I think firstly, there is a cultural issue, right? And we face that on a regular basis as people who advise on consent, right? The first set of issues is, do I have to take consent for everything? Right? And that's a plethora of issues that open up thereafter, right? If I turn to the left, do I have to take consent? If I turn to the right, do I have to take consent? After I take consent, it becomes my data, right? And that's underlying cultural, business cultural, and maybe personal as well. Lack of acceptance that one's data is one's. If I give it to a company for a little while, it's a lease, or I'm giving you something for a short period of time. I am not giving up ownership on that. And there's a string of cultural issues around. Once the cultural issue is sorted, like once you get to a stage where it says, I'm an organization, I'm borrowing your data, and I will use it, then there is an obvious idea that that individual can then ask you to use it whichever way you want. Some of that makes sense. Some of it doesn't make sense because I, as a lawyer who practices data and cybersecurity, do not know what cybersecurity protocols I want some organization to follow. And there is no way that an organization can follow each individual's requirement of cybersecurity protocols. Therein lies the role of the state in prescribing guardrails, infrastructure, standards, protocols. If you are taking my data, and right now, I'm sure everyone knows the new law says, you have to keep my data safe if you're taking my data. That's not very helpful because, as all of us know, in this world you can't keep your data safe 100%. Okay? You just have to have obligations to try your level best, clearly defined, so that I can follow me. Those rules have been in play, like you said, in the financial services space, right? In BCI, to some extent the RBI, To some extent, the DAI and the SEBI, to a lesser extent, the BFIDA, have all come up with rules of the road. Right? Some are clear, some are not clear, work in progress. But now that data has become all pervasive, and now, like you said, everything's moving digital. Education, certificates, credentials, books, all the way down to financial transactions, to health data, to logistics information, everything is moving online. Perhaps we should have digital infrastructure, highway rules, which to my mind is how secure, how do you keep it secure, which direction can data transfer, when does data need to be deleted, when can I store data, why should I store data, when can the government use my data, when can private enterprises, when can people use data without consent? And let's think about this, take one step back and think about it. My friend is in an accident. I go in my car, I pick him up, I take him to the hospital. I know that he is B positive. I know that he is diabetic. If you tell me that I have to take his consent before I tell the hospital that he is B positive and diabetic, it's not workable. Right? Second example. You are going to tier 5 villages. Okay? Places where there's very little electricity. People speak, and we've done this when we do like agri projects, right? We're going there and telling them, give us your consent for 1, 2, 3, 4. Just think about it. Place yourself in, and I don't know how many of you come from villages and how many of you are from cities. But if you go to a village and you tell a villager who's a farmer that I want his consent for taking his name and address and etc. and parceling it off to some bank, right? They are not going to understand any of this. They are basically going to put their thumbprint wherever you show it and give consent. Again, areas where consent is going to fail. So I think one of the biggest challenges in this whole consent-oriented thinking is at some stage we've got to have guardrails which tell me I can act without consent, but which also put strictures on me on how I can act without consent, where I need to act without consent, and where I should not act without consent.
So I'm just going to come back on this with consent, without consent. Is there something in between called delegation? Can it, like in transactions, that we have power of attorney. Can I delegate consent to you for certain things? I trust you for with my finances. You're my financial advisor. Can I delegate financial decisions to you?
So the government has something called consent managers in play, which is delegated authority. I would personally prefer, rather than a manager, clearer rules of the road. Right? I would like to know this is a one-way. This is a place where cars can pass both ways. This is where I'm going to get unfiltered access. This is what I can do. The problem with consent managers is that it focuses only on the management of consent. What the management of consent triggers is my ability to also tell you how to use that data, which is rules of the road. Now suppose we have 20 different people trying to create 20 different rules of the road. That becomes a problem. So even with consent managers, I think they have to be complemented or supplemented with very detailed, and I know I'm a big proponent of decentralization, as I think Professor Srinivasan is as well. But in this case, when it comes to consent, population of 1 point, where are we now? 5, 6, 4, 3, 1.43 billion people. I think consent is very 1990s. We need to move to, and the biggest advantage we have is, and the biggest problem that I have is that I think I became a lawyer because I can speak English, right? So you law school you can speak English to get through. Is an opportunity to let go of our colonial nonsense, create new rules which are desi in nature, our own set of rules that serve our people. Consent should play a role, but things slightly other than consent, using modern technology to determine that if something is good for someone and is necessary, we may not need consent.
So let me get this to the technologist. We have been talking about doing what are the different ways of consent. I need to also make sure that the delegation or consent is purposeful. So I recently heard a story about how insurance companies are looking at their UPI transactions and looking for a specific number, 16 rupees. Anyone of you know what exactly does a 16 rupee transaction mean to an insurance company? Right? It's a smoking. Typical cigarettes cost 16 rupees. And insurance companies are looking at your UPI history and looking for 16 rupee transactions. The frequency, the number of 16 rupee transactions, and are bumping up your premiums. It's a great data analytics story. It's a great pattern recognition story, machine learning, AI story, right? Is it good practice?
So thank you so much for the opportunity speaking on the industry public infrastructure. To add what Mathew was talking about on data consent, so I fully agree that data consent is very important and we should have the records of what I have agreed to. If I have agreed to share my personal authentication or eKYC, I should have recorded my consent. And then somewhere in the logs, somewhere in the audits, wherein if I am leveraging the CIDR of a UIDI, let's say, if I'm using the Aadhaar as a base for authentication and eKYC, then somewhere I have to abide by all the regulations set by UIDI. They have certain regulations. If they allow me to use the license for accessing the UIDI database, if I have the ASA agency in between to leverage the UIDI server, like if I am an entity and I want to do the authentication, perform the authentication and the eKYC, I cannot do it on my own. I need some sort of ASA agency in between so that someone becomes an aggregator to receive response from UIDI CIDR. So that means there are various regulations for the entities who are holding the AU and KU license of UIDI for using the Aadhaar databases. So when we need to comply with those controls, I believe that there are certain checklists which we have to follow and we have to adhere to. Suppose as a citizen, if I want to give my consent, I need to read that consent and what is that consent about. Why I am sharing this data, for what purpose it will be used. It is an umbrella consent or it will be used for some specific purpose. So that we are asked to be there in the data consent. And someone has to, it should be legally vetted with what consent I am putting in my application. If I am recording my response as yes or if I am recording my response as no, my logs for the moment I have provided my consent should be recorded somewhere so that in case if I say that I have not given my consent for so and so authentication and eKYC, someone can come back. If let's say for example I'm using any application like COVID or ABA, and I sometimes refuse that no, I have not given this consent. But then that moment people at the back end somewhere in the records they should log my consent the time I recorded the consent. And in case if the purpose is defeated, if the entity is sharing my details with any other entity for some additional benefits or some additional purpose, I should know that if my records are shared with somebody. So that means I think we need to keep the audit logs, audit trails for any surprise audits or to abide by the UID regulations.
So what kind of technologies do we have to be able to build this audit trail? For instance, I gave a consent for a particular period of time to an insurance company to do my eKYC.
Right.
The insurance company, whatever, repurposed the data to an AI company, built an AI model around it, and that AI company did this repurposing to somebody else. But you revoke your consent from the insurance company. how do we make sure that the consent revoking from here should also go to the child and the grandchild data sharing frameworks?
So I think the access for sharing the consent or the API should be very limited. It's not that anybody is coming and requesting for integrating with our application, we should permit it as it is. No. There has to be security controls in there, and then we need to see whether the other application is planning to integrate to use our data consent or to take this consent as a base and then enhance their facilities which they want to give extend it to the citizens. So there we need to see that if somebody is doing planning some sort of integration, at least we should have some due diligence in place, wherein we should see, okay, the entity, the URL which they are doing, whether it's a public URL, it's in production or UAT or SIT, which environment they are using, am I sharing my production keys with them, and in case if I'm planning to share it, then I should have a complete due diligence process or a checklist wherein I am assured that yes, the entity with which I am planning to share my data consent or my APIs, they will be leveraging to extend the facilities and provide some additional benefits to the citizen with the same consent. They should have appropriate controls in place to integrate.
So if I need to build this audit trails, you are veering towards centralization of data storage.
Correct.
Right? That's a perpetual debate. Do we need to have data which is centralized?
Yeah.
Do we need to have data which is decentralized, available on demand, on call?
Yeah.
If I just jump in, as a counterpoint to that, I think we Indians have a general tendency to like centralization. Again, let's blame our masters, right? What I would prefer, again, back to rules of the road. If someone gets married, let's say insurance company gets married, and this, the new data law as it does, and I pass it on to anybody else, I am liable for any mistakes that I make with that data, and anyone else, any mistake that anyone else makes, right? So let's assume you are an individual, I'm an insurance company. You give me data, I pass that data on to an AI company, which passes that data on to their ML processing unit, which passes it on to some outsourcing center here in Bangalore, which does prompts and checks. As the insurance company that has transferred this data, if that data is identified, should be this insurance company's obligation to make sure nothing goes wrong. And if something goes wrong, this company has to make that. Right? So that's very, very clear. In fact, that is a lot of my clients very, very scared. Because you can imagine the ramifications of running a business like this.
No, but this is putting a lot of ownership on the data provider to know how the data is being used. If the data provider, you talked about tier 3, tier 2 villages, if the data provider is not even aware of what the data is being consumed for, all I get is a higher insurance premium. I don't have a benchmark, it is not higher insurance premium. I don't know where this 16 rupee transaction came from. They asked me for my data, I gave my data. I don't know what the algorithm is. Even for a lot of us in this room, we don't know how the transformations happen in the algorithms.
So the good cultural question to ask is, if my data is being used for good, and let's assume that insurance premiums going up is good because more efficient risk sharing. Let's assume that may not be true. But if my data is being used for good and no harm that I know of has happened, right? Should we necessarily object to that data? Right? Are we so, as a society, so tied into privacy and data that we think that I need the right to, and this is a theoretical question, so Professor Srinivasan, maybe after this we should grab a meal and do that as well. But do we really object to someone using our data without our permission for our good? That's one question. Assuming that's, yes, we object, it's our data, why should I share it with you? The next question to throw it at you, sir, this is because you are leading one of the most innovative think tanks on digital public infrastructure. if you are using my data, regardless of whether it's good or not, you are benefiting from it.
Yes.
Can we find a way for the individual who is giving that data also to benefit from it?
See, the internet actually is built on this. That the traditional idea of the internet and browsing is free, the browser is free, search is free, was built on this idea that there is going to be larger good. So when you do Google, when you search on Google, when you search on other platforms, you actually give up your data to them. And that data is used to personalize your results. When was the last time anybody went to the 5th page of your Google search result? If you have not found whatever you are searching for in the first 2 pages, either it's illegal or it doesn't exist on the internet. The algorithm has perfected itself so well, primarily due to each one of us, billions of searches per day on the engines. They have perfected it so well that the results are relevant in the first 2 pages. The relevance comes only because we have given them the data. Right? Which is not what is happening in YouTube. Compare your search efficiency in text search and compare your search efficiency in videos. The videos are not as efficient as the text search, primarily because we have trained billions of transactions on search, on text, not as much in video. To that level, it's doing good for me. It's doing more good for the provider of the platform. Google is able to charge a bomb to their advertisers because of the data that you and I give me. But you and I are very small specks. They aggregate and they make money. How do we make sure that they are accountable? In a typical internet search, there's not so much personally identifiable data to the advertiser. A large segment, 20 to 30 year olds in Bangalore looking for flatmates. That's the kind of data that an advertiser is getting because he's doing on keywords. But how do we make sure that this kind of thing does not happen in more personal data, like your health records, like your financial records? Simple things like, is my credit history going to get affected because my wife has filed divorce against me? How is that liability, contingent liability, if that happens and there's a contingency, affect my credit history? How is that affecting my enterprise that I'm running? I'm running a small business. Now here is where things start getting this one. How is my enterprise's credit history gets affected because I've been diagnosed with terminal disease, or not even a terminal disease, the debilitating disease, a disability. As an entrepreneur, am I affecting the firm? Now here is where things get working. This ability to do good, ability to do create value, but ability for the platforms to extract value is the premise on which digital world has been built. But where we are going today and where we will go forward are these kinds of cases. These were edge cases in 1985 when the internet was built. Right? Today we know we have integrated all of these. We have common identities, we have common codes are digital, identities are digital, everything is possible. Right? How do we make sure that it's not application, it's only application and betterment, not exploitation?
No, that is great. And again, another example that happened. Sorry, Chandni,
That's okay.
So another example that happened recently, and I can't mention the name of the other side because obviously you don't want to do that, but let's say I was in the High Court arguing a matter for a young girl who was sexually harassed in a cab. And on the other side was, I can't take the name, but one of the subsidiaries did an IPO in the last 2 weeks. It was a cab company that argued that if you were to monitor drivers too closely for safety, it would be too expensive and I would go bankrupt. Now, I use that company's services. I can tell you that every minute traffic jam that happens on every road is carefully tracked and monitored by this cab company to have alternative routes. If you are telling me that you can't provide reasonable security to a person sitting inside that cab, I find it a little hard to believe. What that illustrates, and it's the same thing with most aggregators, most online companies, most digital companies. When that opportunity arises, there is a tendency to maximize gain and not spend on minimizing harm. I think the state's biggest role as we build digital infrastructure, public codes, public infrastructure, open APIs, is to force these private enterprises, and they're fabulous private enterprises, making available services which nobody could imagine, right? Is to force them in their balance sheet to add that cost, which is related to not just profit, but minimizing the harms that can happen along the way. That, sir.
Okay, so this is a good time to come back to Chandni. To be able to monetize this minimizing harm,
Yeah.
to be able to make sure that these technologies exist, a lot of times the contract is between the data provider and the data consumer, but there's an intermediary in between.
Yeah.
And this intermediary needs to be made accountable.
So I think it depends. It's all time it's not necessary because I need to see what is my responsibility for this data. If I have collated a database, if I have the central repository of the database for the citizens, I need to see whether I am the data owner for this, I am the data custodian for this, or what is my limitation, what sort of consent I have accorded while I recorded these consent yes or no from the citizens. So I think we need to first see what my limitation is or what my responsibility is towards the data or towards the central repository I have collected. And the main aim for the DPI, as we all know, that the vital principles are that we need to give a digital identity, then the data exchange. Data exchange is also one of the vital pillar of the DPI. So, in case if there is already a central repository which is residing in a place, so if I want to share it with anybody else, and if I own the DB wherein I have all these entries already feeded in the database. So that moment to restrict and to keep a security on this DB becomes my responsibility. How do I ensure that I am securing my database? What DBs I am using? What is my redundancy planning of the DB in case if I am facing some ransomware attack or something? If there is any other attack on the DB, it's like SQL injection. What is my contingency planning? What is my redundancy? If I have the appropriate backups of the data, or if I have a plan B for retrieving my data, whatever is there in my database. So that becomes our responsibility that if I am the entity, I am owning the data, then how do I secure my system? Where are my server hosted? So that sort of security controls. It's not only that a single domain will help here, Srinivasan. I would say that there are multiple domains to secure our infrastructure, our applications. Continuous testings are there, continuous audits, validations, and also I think the national and international regulation also plays an important role, wherein I see what are my governance and compliance, how am I ensuring my GRC is in place. So that ways, if I cannot secure it 100%, and even if somebody is telling that I can secure it 100%, that's not a fact basically, because you cannot save anything and you cannot give a surety that yes, I have given a 100% risk cover. It's not that. Some or the other way, I think before any technology is introduced, or we have AI, we have ChatGPT, we have blockchains, the hackers are so smart that they already find out a way that how are we going to do a intruder this thing in the system. So in my view, I think we should look at a comprehensive security testing. We should always have consistent, regular checks on the applications, on the servers on the hosting platforms. If I have some local rules, like if let's say for example in India, Ministry of Electronic has already given you can say a regulation that my data should be hosted within the data centers of India. So I need to ensure it becomes my responsibility, it becomes the entity's responsibility that yes, if I need to ensure my premise is secure, my on-prem on a cloud hosting infrastructure is secured, I need to see I am abiding by all the controls of the ISO framework, I am abiding by the NIST or whatever framework is applicable to me.
So I have this one. You keep telling that the technology leads regulation.
Yes.
Technology happens before the regulation.
Yes.
But a lot of solutions you are providing is audit.
Yes.
Security audit. Audit is post-work.
Yes.
I have done it, then I go back and check whether I have done it right or not.
Yeah.
What do we do? How do we build a technology which is pre, before I do something, before I do harm?
Right. So one of the best example is the DevSecOps implementation in the CI/CD pipeline. So let's say if I'm developing something and I know that towards the end of the closure of the source code, I will have testing on my source code, whether my source code what I have written is correct or not, whether it is having vulnerabilities or not. So instead of doing that, why can't I introduce the DevSecOps into the system, which gives me a regular feedback the moment I'm completing a module, the moment I'm we are doing any module free, source code free. So this will have three benefits. I think one is that we will save our time when our modules are freezed. So that moment I don't have to wait for my source code to be freezed and completed. Then again I have to give some time to quality, to functional testing. So why to wait for that? If I am building a pipeline, why can't I introduce a DevSecOps there and then I do a continuous integration, testing there?
So allow me to put you on the spot here.
Sure.
Give me an example of a very good secure implementation of the pipeline.
Okay, so I'm not sure whether I can use that name or not here.
Don't have the name, but tell me a process of
I will not take the name, but I know a particular organization who is involved in this DPI, and the way they are using technology, the way they are leveraging technology, the way they are abiding by all Ministry of Electronics, NCII, PC rules. So it is very important that now we have seen so many, for example, the Russia-Ukraine war we have seen wherein cyber was you can understand the importance there for from the security perspective. So I think those were the lessons like we learned from there that now we have to keep our teams ready all the time, that in case if we face any eventuality in the future, at least we should have a well-trained team to deal with such sort of cyber incidents. So I know organization who is handling this DPI thing, and the way they have framed the federated architecture, the way they have placed the security controls, which is appreciated by NCII, PC, which is appreciated by certain panel agency, because they do and they have invested a lot in the security. So the challenge is, what I believe is in government they don't get appropriate budget for doing a proper security. They can invest in the infrastructure, they can invest in the application development, but when it comes to having the security in place, somehow the government don't get appropriate, but that organization has got a vast budget in the cyber security. So I think if they have, let's say, X for the application development, they have X plus 1 for security. So that means I think if you are investing in security, you will get a lot of benefit, and then you can give an assurance that yes, I am ISO certified and I have certain security controls in place. So that way I think it would be a great thing, and the organization is praised by G20 conference as well. And I think they have also given their case study in the G20 conference, and it's already available in the global DPI repository also.
So it's good to hear that governments are also being able to invest in security by design, right? What are the recourses? If I know that there's a there's a leak, if I know that there's a breach,
Yeah.
what are the consumer recourses?
Okay, so that is, I think, so there is a complete process for a security incident. How do I investigate a security incident? In case if I have gone through a breach, or I need to do a reporting of security incident as well. So we need to first of all identify and isolate the affected. I need to see what is the impact on the systems. In case if we have the affected system, at least isolate the system first. This is the first thing which we do. And also, I think Mathew would agree that we have directions from certain where we need to ensure that in case if there is a breach or there is an incident, at least we need to report it to certain so that they can help and they can add it in the helping us to track the root cause analysis and what is the preventive and corrective action we can take against the incident.
So this is again breach report.
Yeah.
There's a common man's narrative, political also, that the government knows too much about me. They know what I'm spending, they know who I'm spending, what I'm spending for, who I'm paying. This is too much. Being a regular traveler in Europe, they use cash because they want to remain anonymous. Cash is a very this thing for anonymity. We have gone so far ahead of not being a cash economy that there's no anonymity in the payments today. We don't even think of anonymity in payments. We pull out our phones. A lot of us don't carry wallets at all anymore. Even our cards are virtualized. We use virtual cards and all of that. We don't use cash. But the government knows too much. Is there somebody who knows too much about you?
So, I used to live in Singapore for a decade. If you think the Indian government knows too much about you, you should spend some time with them.
Let's not do that. Let's go to Europe.
Yeah.
I want to benchmark with Europe. The government knows nothing about you.
Right? Europe has a history, and there's a reason for it.
Yeah.
Government surveillance was a large part of Nazi Germany's anti-Jew tirade, right? So there's a history to why they are
So the psyche is anti-profile.
It is anti-profile.
But that's just Germany. But look at the rest of Europe. It's still the same mindset.
Yeah, I mean,
There's some history,
yeah.
but it's done well.
Some of it is history, some of it is this is how it's been done for the last 100 years.
Right.
So parts of Europe are actually, in my head, far older than India. India actually spent a fair amount of time in Europe, spent a fair amount of time in Southeast Asia. India is actually, to my mind, the most rapidly evolving society that I've seen. We've not had a problem with privacy. We've not had a government, to my mind at least, that has misused knowledge about those people.
Okay.
Not extensively, not ruthlessly, maybe isolated instances. So we don't, all of us don't care. But now with digital public infrastructure coming in, there is the possibility of future governments misusing this. And so do we need controls for the cops? Right? Does technology need, and I think one of the things that the Europeans do very well, that our new law does not do, is introduce transparency obligations to people who are being watched. For example, let's assume you're running a server-side AI company in Bangalore. The cops come and say, I want all your data. As someone who's advised these companies not to do it, this is the first thing we'll say is,
Such incidents are happening, Mathew. We used to get a guy calling on the police uniform and then saying that there's so many cases that is against you and now you have to come to yes, if you.
now my advice would be, please give all the data because Indian police, you have to go.
Yeah.
The law says very clearly that you have given this data is confidential. You can't tell anybody that you've given this data. Suppose I had all your data. Professor Srinivasan is the police. He came and asked me for all your data. I give him all the data. I can't even tell you. So you don't even know. And that is a problem. Again, right back to our old laws, which have a new name, right? But it's still the old law. It's very much pro-government.
Right.
So it's not one government. So we need to think about one, can the laws impose checks on the government? Two, can technology itself impose checks on the government?
Exactly. I think, you know what, governments will come and go. Governments will privatize services. There are certain things which government will do on their own, there are things which governments will privatize. And we cannot trust the way we trust a police, the way we trust a private agency. Right? The private agency, like a Google or any other tech giant, has its own motivations to use your data. And therefore, the best way to do all of this is to be able to embed technology at the design.
By security by design, security by default, and security by design.
I think we need to.
During the development period only, we need to ensure that it's not that it will be post-facto thing when I have developed the application already and then I bring up my security control. It has to be by default.
Just to add two words there, accountability by default and transparency by default.
Transparency is already
Absolutely. Right. So we seem to have come to a common agreement at some place. A good time for me to throw the floor open to the audience. Do we have any questions, any specific questions? We have some time for the questions. No, we won't identify you. Yeah.
Please.
Sure. Very interesting conversation, quite different from the rest of the sessions we've had. One of the intriguing thought which comes to my mind is, are we okay to sacrifice privacy for national security or safety of our citizens? So there are, it's a related field, but intelligence gathering exercises or surveillance exercises for national security cannot have attributes like taking consent from those kind of actors or even the larger public. So since we have such a eminent panel here, I thought I would seek your thoughts on this.
Okay. So before I let any of these answer this, what is national security itself is a big question. We come from a world where the door is closed by default. It will be open only when you swipe your FASTag. Right? We're not in a place where it is closed, where it is default open and closes when unauthorized entry. The world, metaphorically, is a closed door, open when you authenticate yourself. And therefore, we don't know what is national security. So, given what is national security, yeah, so, any of you? Yeah.
Yeah. Sure. So, tell me, I'm sorry.
Yeah. My name is Rajiv Bhattacharya from TCS.
So, Rajiv, how many, if you have taken a booking in any of the hotel, how many times you shared your Aadhaar number there? And what consent you have given there that, see, I am submitting my Aadhaar number and now tell me how you will secure my data. So, it is like we are responsible and we are disclosing our information, but as you said that for the national security, is it a good choice or it's not a good choice? So I would say there is a reason why DPI was launched in the government sector. It's not in the private. Why? Because there are some rules and regulations for the government who are handling DPI. There is National Critical Infrastructure, NCI or PC, you all might have heard of. So these are the nodal agencies for security. So in case of any security threat or the national threat, and I have been to a few of the conferences, Srinivasan, wherein it's a group, like it was I think it was chaired by Ajit Doval's team, and then there, we got to know that it was during that Russia-Ukraine war. They are preparing a workforce from India, and we got the training for 10 days. The people from Estonia were there, the trainers from Estonia were there, because, common people would not know what is happening at the back end. But trust me, See, to leverage the DPI, it has to be trustworthy. Unless I provide you trust that your data is secure, you would not give me your consent, or you would not give me your, share to use your identity or do the eKYC. So somewhere I have to build that trust, and I would say that from government perspective, if you would see, post this AIMS case and post this other breaches, they have taken stringent, and I was, I have so many times have given responses on the STAD and UNSTAD responses from Rajya Sabha, wherein they keep on asking, how are you ensuring that the data consent you are collecting, the citizen information you are collecting is secured? And there is a one procedure, like if my application is public centric, I need to enlist my application as a critical infrastructure of India with NCIIPC, so that they become my helping hand when I am in the crisis or when I am facing through any breach. So
what I'm hearing from you
yeah.
is data that you give to the government, you are very careful, you are very careful,
someone is
and the
having
government is
eyes,
doing this.
yes.
But the data that you enter at the Resident Welfare Association, that you enter at the gate, is not secure.
It's not secure. So then,
How much data do you give at the Resident Welfare Association? How much data do you give to the bakeries that you order your birthday cake to?
you go to every shop, Srinivasan.
Yeah.
Unless you give your mobile number, they won't, in the Reliance Trends. And,
Exactly, they won't
any
invoice
shop,
you.
they will not invoice you. But you have a choice. You can tell them that, please bill me without my phone number. But people don't do it. Most of us share our mobile numbers with them. We share our PII information with them. So, see, in the public, we can still trust that the DPI is somehow secured, because they have to also abide by
And the
local
same Reliance
authorities.
Trend also has some CCTV camera. So you are given your facial information, you are given your mobile number, you have given your everything. And they also know your shopping history. You have given your, you did a UPI transaction, they know your financial data as well.
And coming back, sorry, to the AIMS case again, I'll just again reiterate that. Then AIMS was approached to enlist themselves as CII with NCIIPC. Why? Because if you are enlisted as a critical infrastructure of India and it is public centric, it has some impact on the public. That means they will give you some assurance, they will do your risk assessment, they will see your security posture, and then they will submit the reports in case if you have some flaws in the system, at least you should remediate it.
Absolutely.
So that ways, I think that there are stringent control. There are eyes on every government by these agencies like CERTIN, MITI, NCIIPC. And that's how we ensure that, yes, the data which is with the government public organization, I think it is secure.
Okay. Good. Yeah.
How about data with the bank? Because if you're going for a loan, they'll ask you for your 2 years Form 16 document. They will ask you for your credit report. They will ask you for your salary slips, your I don't know. So
Everything.
Everything they'll ask you. And then as a privacy consultant or as somebody who's in information security, it is pretty scary to give that dealership that kind of data to the banks.
No, banks are still purposeful. They use this data to assess your credit history.
Right.
Have you applied for a visa?
Yes, I applied for
US
a visa.
visa.
US
Right?
visa, yes.
Imagine what data you give to a visa organization, right? And do you know what they do with the paper? At least in banks, you can still give electronic copies, right? Go look at the visa processing centers, the amount of paper that they are shredding, and the quality of shredding, you will be appalled. Okay.
If I could ask
There's-
that gentleman one question.
Yes.
For him,
Yes.
why are you scared about banks having your data?
Because there was this Domino's breach, and my data was there in, and it was pretty scary because just from the number you can see my all addresses were there, my order history was there, and I could see my bosses and everyone's order history. So it was pretty scary because that data was open, and I
Mathew, if
think.
you don't mind,
How do I
would
know?
like to-
How does it matter whether you like macaroni?
No, it matters because your addresses, your phone
The
number,
phone number and all order history was
address,
there.
order history, your addresses, everything was there in that data. And then you spoke about visa, applying for visa. So you have questions like, do you have any relatives who are terrorists? These are real questions in visa when you apply.
I thought that was a legitimate question.
Who would apply for a visa with a tick mark?
Absolutely.
No, but on a serious note, I was at a data client's office yesterday. And there was me and one colleague of mine, slightly junior with hair on his head, obviously. And the gentleman who was running this business, he runs a data analysis. He said, if you give me your phone number, I don't need anything else.
Yeah.
But from a combination of public sources and from the dark web, I will be able to get your address. I will be able to get your photograph. I will be able to get your credit history, your CIBIL scores for the lack of an alternative word. I will be able to get your financial transactions. I will be able to get your recent trips. There is banks, insurance companies are some of the most 1990s users of data. There is so much more available. In fact, I turned around to him and said, why don't you launch a B2C product which will allow me to track my online data? Right? I would go and definitely sign up. And if you can go on and now build a way in which I can scrub my data from the internet, you've got a gold mine. I don't mind paying X thousand rupees to make sure that all those sources are automatically scrubbed clean or anonymized or jumbled, whatever it is that you want to do. But it's all out there. And banks don't, I can work with many. The largest ones don't have complicated tracking systems, databases. A lot of your data is unstructured, so the linkages are not clear. Far more scared of the dark web and the data that's there and how that's going to get used than banks and insurance, which are all closely regulated.
Or the dumb call center stuff. So I keep getting calls every February, March saying that, do you want to apply to IIM Bangalore as a student? I can help you crack CAT. I can help you through this. Because they've connected my name to an IIM, my name to this one. They don't know whether you're an IIM aspirant, whether you're an IIM professor. Somebody is making some random things and making those calls. Those calls are fun. But that's actually far more dangerous than the fellow who actually uses the data inefficiently for the right purpose, the banks and the financial institutions.
But again, as you go thinking about digital public infrastructure, one of the things you must spend some time on is digital public rule enforcement.
Yeah.
Right? We've got these rules. We're the first to admit enforcement mechanisms dismal generally. Can technology step in to fix that gap, make it quicker, etc.?
Exactly. So the solution lies in self-regulation, technology, doing all this privacy, all of this security by design at the development stage, not let for things to slide and then go do audit and recourses, right? On that note, we have almost run out of time. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mathew, for insights. Thanks, Chandni, for your insights. And thank you very much for the audience.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you everyone for this valuable session. We would like to present you a token of appreciation.